Chronic stress is one of the most damaging forces acting on the human brain, yet it is often the most ignored. When stress becomes constant, the brain enters a survival mode it was never meant to stay in for long periods. This survival mode floods the body with cortisol, a stress hormone designed to help you in moments of danger. Cortisol sharpens reflexes and prepares the body to respond quickly. But when cortisol stays high day after day, it begins to act like poison to the brain rather than protection. One of the areas most affected is the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory formation, learning, and emotional stability. When cortisol remains elevated, the hippocampus shrinks, making it harder to remember information, stay calm, or think clearly. Many people interpret this as getting older, becoming forgetful, or losing patience. But often it is simply the long-term impact of chronic stress. Another major effect of chronic stress is its impact on the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles decision making, planning, self-control, focus, and problem-solving. Under stress, the prefrontal cortex becomes less active, while the emotional centers of the brain, such as the amygdala, become more active. This shift makes people more reactive and less rational. They make impulsive decisions, struggle to focus, and often feel overwhelmed by situations that used to feel manageable. Chronic stress can make even simple tasks seem complicated, not because the tasks are difficult, but because the brain is functioning in a weakened state. Over time, this constant mental pressure drains motivation and creates a sense of emotional exhaustion. Stress also disrupts the balance of neurotransmitters, including serotonin and dopamine, which are essential for mood regulation, motivation, and a sense of well-being. When stress interferes with these chemicals, people may experience anxiety, irritability, low mood, or loss of interest in things they previously enjoyed. This emotional imbalance often leads to unhealthy coping habits like overeating, isolation, mindless scrolling, or withdrawing from responsibilities. These behaviors create more stress, which in turn further damages the brain, creating a cycle that becomes harder to break with time. Chronic stress affects the body as well, but its effects always begin in the brain. Sleep becomes disrupted because a stressed brain struggles to power down. Memory becomes unreliable because the hippocampus cannot function properly. Focus becomes scattered because the prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed. Emotional sensitivity rises because the amygdala becomes hyperactive. When these systems fall out of balance, life feels heavier, reactions become stronger, and the simplest challenges can trigger frustration. Many people live like this for years, assuming it is normal, but it is not normal. It is simply untreated stress. Breaking the cycle of chronic stress requires retraining the brain to feel safe again. Small, consistent interventions can bring powerful results. Deep breathing signals the brain to calm the nervous system, lowering cortisol within minutes. Mindfulness helps the prefrontal cortex regain control, strengthening clarity and emotional balance. Setting boundaries reduces unnecessary pressure and prevents burnout. Physical movement increases blood flow to the brain, releasing chemicals that repair stress-related damage. Even simple breaks during the day help reset the brain, preventing overload. The most important step is recognizing that chronic stress is not a sign of failure or weakness. It is a natural response that has gone unmanaged for too long. When you begin to care for your brain, reduce pressure, and create moments of calm, the brain slowly repairs itself. Neurons grow stronger, memory improves, focus returns, and emotional resilience increases. A less stressed brain becomes a more capable, creative, and confident mind. Poor sleep is one of the most underestimated yet most damaging habits affecting brain health. Many people treat sleep as optional, something to cut short when life gets busy, but the truth is that sleep is a biological necessity, not a luxury. When the brain sleeps, it performs maintenance tasks that are impossible during waking hours. It clears out toxins, repairs damaged cells, processes emotions, and strengthens memory. Cutting sleep short disrupts all of these essential functions, and the result is a brain that becomes less efficient, less stable, and more vulnerable to stress. Even a single night of poor sleep can impair focus, slow reaction time, increase irritability, and weaken problem-solving abilities. Over weeks, months, and years, the impact becomes far more serious, affecting mental health, emotional control, and even long-term cognitive performance. One of the most important things that happens during sleep is the cleansing of the brain through the glymphatic system. This system works like a deep cleaning crew, removing waste and toxins that accumulate throughout the day. If you consistently sleep too little, these toxins build up and interfere with brain communication. People often describe this as mental fog, struggling to think clearly or recall simple information. It is not laziness or lack of intelligence. It is the brain operating under toxic pressure caused by sleep deprivation. Without proper rest, the brain becomes slower and less flexible, making learning more difficult and memory less reliable. Over time, this weakens the brain's ability to adapt and grow. Sleep is also where the brain processes emotions. When a person doesn't sleep well, the emotional centers of the brain, especially the amygdala, become more reactive. This leads to increased anxiety, mood swings, irritability, and lower stress tolerance. Small problems start to feel overwhelming because the brain has not had the chance to reset its emotional balance. Studies show that people who sleep poorly have higher levels of frustration, lower motivation, and are more likely to interpret situations negatively. This emotional instability affects relationships, work performance, and self-confidence. Sleep deprivation also weakens the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for self-control, discipline, focus, and decision-making. As a result, people make poorer decisions, struggle to resist impulses, and feel mentally exhausted even when doing simple tasks. Poor sleep also disrupts hormones that influence appetite, mood, energy, and cognitive performance. Lack of sleep increases ghrelin, the hormone that makes you feel hungry, and decreases leptin, the hormone that signals fullness. This explains why people crave unhealthy foods when tired. It's not just a craving, it's a hormonal imbalance caused by poor sleep. Sleep deprivation also lowers serotonin and dopamine, chemicals essential for happiness, motivation, and emotional stability. With these chemicals out of balance, people feel unmotivated, stressed, and mentally drained. Consistently poor sleep can even lead to long-term damage. Chronic sleep deprivation accelerates aging in the brain, increases inflammation, and raises the risk of cognitive decline later in life. It prevents the brain from forming strong neural connections, which are essential for learning and creativity. Many people ignore these warning signs, pushing through fatigue with caffeine or distraction, but the brain continues to weaken quietly in the background. Improving sleep is one of the fastest ways to improve brain function. Simple habits like keeping a consistent sleep schedule, reducing screen time before bed, creating a calm nighttime routine, and sleeping in a dark, quiet environment can transform brain health. When the brain gets the sleep it needs, memory improves, focus strengthens, mood becomes more stable, and emotional resilience returns. Sleep restores mental clarity and gives the brain the power to function at its highest level. In the end, protecting your sleep is one of the most powerful ways to protect your mind, your health, and your future. Digital overstimulation has become one of the most common yet most damaging influences on the modern brain. With smartphones, social media, constant notifications, and endless entertainment available at all times, the brain is exposed to far more stimulation than it was ever designed to handle. While technology offers convenience and connection, too much of it rewires the brain in harmful ways, weakening attention span, reducing focus, increasing anxiety, and making deep thinking more difficult. The constant switching between apps, messages, and tasks forces the brain into a state of fragmentation where it is always alert, always reacting, and never resting. This leads to mental fatigue, reduced productivity, and a gradual decline in cognitive performance. One of the biggest effects of digital overstimulation is the damage it does to the brain's ability to concentrate. Every notification, every swipe, every quick video trains the mind to expect rapid stimulation. The brain becomes addicted to constant novelty. When this happens, long periods of focus begin to feel uncomfortable, even painful. Tasks that require deep thinking, patience, or sustained effort become harder to complete because the brain keeps seeking the quick dopamine hits that come from scrolling or switching apps. Over time, this creates a brain that struggles to stay committed to one thing, jumps from thought to thought, and becomes restless without constant input. This loss of focus impacts learning, work performance, relationships, and the ability to stay present. Another harmful effect is how digital overload overstimulates the emotional centers of the brain. Social media, in particular, exposes the mind to a constant stream of comparison, noise, conflict, and unrealistic expectations. The brain processes these inputs as emotional triggers. Even if someone thinks they are not affected, the subconscious mind reacts. This leads to higher stress, increased anxiety, and a sense of being overwhelmed. When the brain is constantly exposed to intense or dramatic content, it becomes more reactive and less capable of staying calm. This emotional overstimulation weakens the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for rational thinking, self-control, and decision-making. As a result, people may become more impulsive, more sensitive, and more easily distracted. Digital overstimulation also disrupts memory and learning. Because the brain is constantly switching between tasks, it cannot encode information properly. This leads to forgetfulness, difficulty recalling details, and mental fog. The brain thrives on repetition, focus, and deep processing, but digital habits promote the opposite. Multitasking, which is glorified in the digital era, actually reduces efficiency and lowers cognitive performance. The brain cannot multitask, it can only switch rapidly between tasks, and this switching drains mental energy. Eventually, the mind becomes tired, scattered, and less capable of handling complex ideas. Sleep is another major casualty of digital overload. Screens emit blue light that disrupts the brain's natural sleep rhythms, making it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. Additionally, stimulating content keeps the mind active long after the device is turned off. A brain that is overstimulated at night cannot properly wind down, leading to insomnia, shallow sleep, or waking up feeling unrefreshed. This lack of restful sleep weakens the brain further, creating a cycle where tiredness leads to more screen use, which leads to even worse sleep and lower mental performance. Reducing digital overstimulation doesn't require eliminating technology. It requires controlling how it's used. Simple changes such as turning off unnecessary notifications, scheduling free time, avoiding screens before bed, and practicing intentional focus can significantly improve brain function. Replacing mindless scrolling with reading, reflection, movement, or meaningful conversations helps restore balance to the brain. Over time, the mind begins to feel clearer, calmer, and more focused. Attention span strengthens, emotional balance returns, and the brain becomes capable of deep thinking again. The goal is not to disconnect from the digital world, but to prevent it from controlling the brain's energy, attention, and well-being. Poor diet is one of the most underestimated factors contributing to the decline of brain health, yet it has one of the most powerful and direct effects on how the brain functions every single day. The brain uses more energy than any other organ in the body, consuming up to 20 to 30% of the calories you take in. That means every bite you eat becomes fuel for your brain or becomes poison. When the diet is filled with processed foods, excessive sugar, unhealthy oils, and artificial additives, the brain experiences inflammation that disrupts communication between neurons. This inflammation slows your thinking, weakens memory, reduces focus, and increases the risk of mood problems. People often describe this feeling as brain fog, heaviness, or difficulty concentrating, not realizing these symptoms are directly linked to poor nutritional choices. One of the biggest contributors to brain inflammation is the high amount of sugar found in modern diets. Sugar spikes the blood glucose levels, causing the brain's energy supply to become unstable. Over time, these spikes damage blood vessels and interrupt the smooth flow of oxygen and nutrients into the brain. This leads to slower processing, lower cognitive energy, and increased mental fatigue. Excess sugar also disrupts insulin balance, which directly affects memory and learning. Diets high in sugar have been linked to a decline in brain volume in areas responsible for emotional stability and decision making. Many people use sugar for quick energy or comfort, unaware that it slowly damages the brain's long-term performance. Unhealthy fats, especially trans fats and excessive omega-6 oils found in fried foods and junk food, also harm the brain. These fats create inflammation and damage cell membranes, making it harder for neurons to communicate effectively. When brain cells cannot send signals properly, it affects everything from mood to concentration to problem solving. Healthy fats, on the other hand, such as omega-3 fatty acids, nourish the brain and help build strong, flexible cell membranes. Without enough omega-3s, the brain becomes more vulnerable to stress, less resilient, and more prone to mood swings. This is why diets lacking in fish, nuts, seeds, and avocados often contribute to anxiety, irritability, and cognitive decline. Another harmful effect of poor diet is nutrient deficiency. The brain requires essential vitamins and minerals such as B vitamins, magnesium, iron, zinc, and antioxidants to function properly. When the diet lacks these nutrients, neurotransmitters become imbalanced, leading to low motivation, fatigue, sadness, and trouble focusing. For example, low levels of B12 or folate can cause memory problems and slow thinking. Low magnesium increases stress and disrupts sleep, further damaging brain health. Antioxidants from colorful fruits and vegetables protect the brain from oxidative stress, a form of cellular damage that accelerates aging. Without these protective nutrients, the brain becomes more vulnerable to toxins and wear and tear. Poor diet also affects gut health, which plays a major role in brain function. The gut and brain are connected through the gut-brain axis, a communication network where signals travel back and forth. When the gut is inflamed or filled with harmful bacteria due to unhealthy eating, the brain receives distress signals. This can lead to anxiety, low mood, and cognitive problems. A diet high in fiber, probiotics, and whole foods supports a healthy gut, which in turn supports a healthy brain. Improving diet is one of the fastest ways to improve mental performance. When people shift from processed foods to whole, nutrient-rich meals, they often notice clearer thinking, stronger memory, better mood, and more consistent energy. Eating foods like leafy greens, berries, nuts, seeds, fatty fish, eggs, whole grains, and clean proteins gives the brain the fuel it needs to thrive. Hydration also matters because even slight dehydration can slow cognitive processing and increase irritability. Over time, nourishing the brain with the right foods builds stronger neural pathways, reduces inflammation, and supports long-term cognitive health. Lack of physical activity is one of the most silent yet damaging habits affecting brain health, because movement is not only crucial for the body, but also acts as a fundamental source of nourishment. For the brain, many people associate exercise only with losing weight or staying fit, but its most important impact happens at the neurological level. When the body stays inactive for long periods, blood flow to the brain decreases, oxygen delivery becomes limited, and the brain receives fewer of the chemicals it needs to grow, repair, and function efficiently. This reduction in blood flow causes the brain to become slower, foggier, and less capable of staying focused. Even simple thoughts feel heavier, and mental clarity gradually fades. A sedentary lifestyle weakens the brain in the same way that it weakens muscles through lack of use. One of the most powerful effects of regular physical activity is the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, known as BDNF. BDNF is often called fertilizer for the brain because it stimulates the growth of new neurons and strengthens the connections between existing ones. When you exercise, your brain produces more BDNF, allowing it to stay sharp, flexible, and strong. But when you avoid movement, BDNF levels drop, and the brain's ability to adapt, learn, and solve problems declines. This leaves you more vulnerable to stress and reduces your ability to think creatively or remember information. Over time, low levels of BDNF contribute to quicker cognitive aging, making mental fatigue appear earlier in life. Exercise also has a deep impact on mood and emotional health. Physical movement releases serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins, the chemicals responsible for happiness, motivation, and emotional balance. When people live sedentary lives, these chemicals become imbalanced, leading to increased anxiety, irritability, sadness, or emotional numbness. This is why people who do not move regularly often feel low energy, low confidence, and low motivation. It is not always a mindset problem. Sometimes it is simply a lack of the brain chemistry that movement naturally creates. Regular exercise helps regulate stress hormones like cortisol, making the brain more resilient and better able to handle challenges. Another important effect of inactivity is the weakening of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision making, planning, concentration, and self-control. Physical activity strengthens this part of the brain by improving blood flow and increasing neural activity. When the body doesn't move, the prefrontal cortex becomes less active, making it harder to stay disciplined, manage impulses, or maintain focus. This is one reason why people who avoid movement often struggle with procrastination, brain fog, and low mental stamina. Even simple tasks demand more effort because the brain is operating below its optimal capacity. Sedentary living also affects sleep, which in turn affects cognitive performance. People who do not move enough often struggle with either falling asleep or staying asleep because their bodies never expend enough physical energy during the day. Poor sleep further damages memory, focus, and emotional stability, creating a cycle where lack of movement leads to poor sleep, and poor sleep leads to even less motivation to move. This cycle quietly accelerates stress, cognitive decline, and emotional imbalance. Incorporating movement into daily life does not require extreme workouts or intense routines. Even moderate exercise, like 20 to 30 minutes of walking, stretching, or light aerobic activity, significantly increases blood flow to the brain and boosts neurotransmitter levels. Over time, these small habits create a stronger, healthier brain with better mood, clearer focus, and more resilience. Movement interrupts stress patterns, recharges mental energy, and improves cognitive performance. With consistent activity, the brain becomes sharper, calmer, and more capable of handling the demands of daily life. Negative thinking patterns are one of the most powerful yet invisible forces that shape the health of the brain. When negative thoughts repeat over and over, they form mental pathways that become stronger with time, turning negativity into an automatic habit. Dr. Daniel A. Menn calls these patterns A&T, automatic negative thoughts, because they enter the mind without permission and begin influencing emotions, decisions, and behaviors. The danger of these thoughts is that they feel true even when they are not. The brain reacts to them as if they are facts, releasing stress chemicals that damage neurons and weaken emotional balance. Over time, the constant flow of negativity reshapes the brain, making it more reactive, more fearful, more doubtful, and less capable of staying calm or thinking clearly. Repeated negative thoughts increase the production of cortisol, a stress hormone that shrinks the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory, learning, and emotional regulation. When cortisol stays elevated, the brain has difficulty forming strong memories, processing information, or managing emotions effectively. This is why people who constantly think negatively often feel overwhelmed, forgetful, or mentally tired. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, also becomes hyperactive, causing people to interpret ordinary situations as threats. Simple problems feel like disasters, small mistakes feel catastrophic, and uncertainty triggers anxiety. As these patterns strengthen, people begin to expect negative outcomes, even when life gives them no reason to do so. Negative thinking also weakens the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for logic, reasoning, problem solving, self-control, and decision-making. When negativity dominates the mind, the prefrontal cortex becomes less active, making it harder to think rationally or make wise decisions. Instead, the emotional centers of the brain take over, leading to impulsive actions, reactive behavior, and difficulty staying focused. This is why negative thinkers often struggle with motivation, confidence, productivity, and concentration. Their brain is constantly battling internal stress instead of operating at full strength. One of the most damaging aspects of chronic negative thinking is how it affects beliefs. The more a person repeats a negative idea, such as "I'm not good enough, and nothing will ever change," or "I always fail," the more the brain accepts it as truth. These beliefs become mental filters that distort reality, causing the mind to overlook positive experiences and amplify negative ones. People begin to doubt themselves, avoid challenges, and feel stuck. This mental pattern reduces resilience and blocks personal growth, because the brain becomes conditioned to expect failure instead of possibility. Breaking the cycle of negative thinking requires conscious, consistent mental training. The first step is awareness. When a negative thought appears, instead of accepting it automatically, the mind must pause and observe it. Questioning the thought weakens its power. Is this thought based on fear or fact? Is there evidence against it? Is there a more realistic interpretation? This simple questioning interrupts the automatic cycle and begins the process of rewiring the brain. Over time, these moments of awareness reduce the intensity of negative thinking and strengthen the logical parts of the brain. Another powerful method to combat negative thinking is practicing gratitude. Gratitude forces the brain to look for what is going well instead of what is going wrong. This shifts neural activity away from fear and toward appreciation, increasing dopamine and serotonin. These chemicals protect the brain from stress, improve mood, and create new pathways associated with positivity and resilience. Small daily habits, like writing down a few things you are grateful for or mentally scanning positive moments, help retrain the brain to notice good instead of focusing on negativity. Replacing negative thoughts with balanced, truthful thoughts is not about forcing positivity. It is about creating a healthier mental environment where the brain can perform at its best. Over time, the brain becomes calmer, stronger, more focused, and more resilient. Emotional reactions become more controlled, confidence increases, and mental clarity returns. By challenging negative thinking and building healthier patterns, anyone can create a brain that supports growth, peace, and long-term emotional well-being.